Coming up this week on Breaking Badness, today we discuss who is the boss? A rogue who is super gives researchers superpowers no one should have. Next up, arch nemesis of the archives. The Internet Archive is under attack, with a breach revealing info for 31 million accounts. And of course, our fun game, Gold Guidance and Grievances. With that, Breaking Badness is next. Welcome to Breaking Badness, episode number 193, recorded on October 14th, 2024. I am your co-host, Callie, DDoS Club 7, Fensel. With me is co-host Tim, way back Miami Sound Machine, Helming. And last but not least, Taylor, Trivial TTPs, Takedown Time Worm Telco TLD Wilkes Pierce. Taylor, why would you give me something so long to read?
You're welcome.
For everybody's entertainment, of course.
You're my new enemy.
I can give it a read. Want me to give it a read?
Yeah, see, how fast can you read it?
Yeah. Taylor, trivial TTPs take out time-worn telco TLD Wilkes Pierce. That's what I was going for.
It's been so long since I've spoken with you both on the pod. The gang's all here, and we're on video.
193 episodes. Wow.
Where's the time gone?
We
We're
didn't solve this in
approaching the
192 episodes. We haven't fixed InfoSec in 192 episodes.
Whoa, is this be the one?
Stay tuned to find out.
Why not us?
Why not me? Why not this?
It's not us. Who?
Yeah, it's this scrappy trio right here. Wait, let me ask my crystal ball. Are we going to solve InfoSec? Outlook not so good. Just wanted to show everybody my crafts.
Is that an internet-connected crystal ball?
No, it's
Well,
not wired.
I think substantially more robust than the Magic 8 Ball. Does it have a lot more possible answers than the Magic 8 Ball? Does it have every possible answer? I guess a real crystal ball has every possible answer.
Every answer available.
Can
Yeah.
you see the other seeing stones through that?
I can see the future, and I don't know. It's looking like there might be some more jorts in the future. I'm not so sure.
Yes.
We know that. Yeah.
It's a little blurry, but
Yeah, no, that won't be too far off.
okay. Yeah, it's just practical. Turning pants into shorts. Yeah. What's been going on with you two?
Oh, man. Keeping the internet safe.
Yeah.
Even if we're not done, we've started.
We had a pretty good dent.
You just got to get it going.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got the ball rolling, and we're all here today and can see each other. That's amazing. I love that for us. So yeah, welcome to my office. Please don't judge my mess.
Did you ever see that cartoon? I love this cartoon. It was like looking down. It was a top-down view from the ceiling down of somebody where there was the desk and the computer with the webcam. And it was like this wedge of perfection. And on either side of the wedge was all the full disaster of the rest of the room. But the wedge of perfection was what the webcam could see.
So like
And
the cone of awareness.
yeah, the cone of awareness. So there's got to be millions and millions of people who have exactly that. I don't. I just use virtual backgrounds. It's chaos in the background in real life for me. And I just have stopped even trying to pretend it isn't.
That's fair. That's fair.
I am coming to you from the Domain Tools liminal space.
Woo.
I exist in the solution arena.
That's a good place to be.
Good place to be. I love that. I'm just existing in, I'd like to show people clarity. So I'm not using my background, but you can see like the ADHD riddled mind that is mine.
Also, my dogs aren't here, so maybe there won't be dog barks during this, but they might come home as we record. So who knows? There might be dog barks.
We could see,
Be tuned to find out.
maybe we'll see Simon. I could show him.
Mm.
This is my Bubsy Simon.
That-
Look at that guy.
That
Hi.
everybody.
He's so cute. So he
If
might.
the internet had just remained primarily for cat content, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are today in so many ways. We might not all have jobs like the ones that we have. So there's that.
I just assume we'd be tending to large servers filled with cat pictures, right? Like,
Yeah. Just making sure that they were working perfectly and
Yeah.
perfectly.
I would assume
There
I
you go.
was going to be making some cat content. Maybe we should talk about some InfoSec-y things.
Cool.
We could. I think it'd be a good idea. And actually, the first thing we're going to talk about, the first article is who is the boss? For anybody that's missing those puns, we've got them for you here. And this article was actually something that friend of the podcast, Alan Liska, suggested a few weeks ago. He's like, this is perfect to discuss on the podcast. Alan, I am listening to you. I hear you. And not only do I hear you,
You feel seen, Alan?
do you, Alan?
You could
Not
come on the podcast on video and be very seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're doing that now. We've been going through all of our wonderful content from Black Hat for the past few weeks. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to or watch that, because you can do that on either whatever medium you prefer, you can do that. So we haven't had a chance to talk about this particular article. What we're going to do now is discuss who is the boss, where $20 might not feel like it goes a long way, but for one researcher, a crisp Andrew Jackson helped gain entry to counterfeit HTTPS certificates, email activity tracking, and the position to execute any code desired on thousands of servers. So that's a lot for the low price of $20.
I was going to say just that.
Incredible value.
Let's see, that's great value. So the researcher here in question is Benjamin Harris. So Taylor, we'll start with you. How did Benjamin Harris inadvertently gain access to such sensitive systems?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. He's the CEO of Watchtower, so we should give a quick shout out Watchtower. They do attack surface management from a red teaming perspective, and this is part of that process is what are all the weird little nooks and crannies of the internet that we can get in and see where disparities might exist. After summer camp, it seemed like he was a little bored and was sitting around and ran some searches across the TLD space and noticed that one of the GTLDs, which is .mobi, which is from 2006, actually. When I looked into the history of the .mobi TLD, I was fascinated. It was originally designed by a bunch of telco companies to put it together to build out a mobile version of the internet, but the iPhone came out like maybe 18 months after. It's maybe even sooner than that after this happened, and started rendering full pages and giving people a real browser that sparked the way for what we see now as the mobile internet, or sites that are designed for mobile or mobile friendly, what have you. And then app stores got in the way as well. But in any event, this TLD was born. It was then sold off a number of years later. And at some point, they changed the name of their Whois server. So they changed it from the original Whois Mobi site to a new Whois server site. And they did not renew the registration on the old one, which these registrars exist to help carve out spaces in these various TLDs. And Mr. Harris found himself a space that it had been owned before, had a prior owner, but it was currently not owned by anybody. So being an enterprising fellow, he signed up to the registrar to register their old Whois server, which they were happy to do. They're like, yeah, $20 is $20. We'll take it. And then immediately stood up a server and started getting all kinds of crazy inbound requests.
Taylor, do you ever get the impression that registrars maybe don't scrutinize every domain registration?
I like to joke they're not checking ID at the door, but they're not even getting to the door sometimes. They're just opening it up and letting people come on through, it seems
Yeah,
like.
there isn't a door. There's just a credit card form.
I am old enough to remember back in 2017, not long after I had started here at Domain Tools, a different researcher managed to compromise a different TLD space, .io, in slightly different fashion. In this case, the registrar in charge of that space at the time did not prohibit folks from registering the authoritative name servers. So that researcher had to buy off 5 of the authoritative name servers, so $50 instead of 20, but also found themselves in a very similar spot where if you can answer authoritatively for the TLD space, it offers up a lot of interesting ways for you to get in between people and where they think they're going to be. And so history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, as I've read. And this to me looks very similar, where in this place they were able to grab that Whois server, which then they found out that even though the .mobi registrar had switched things over, there were plenty of places that were still asking the old server, Whois server, hey, can you tell me who owns so-and-so domain? And in some of those places that were asking the older server were folks that do like certificates for domains that enable domains to say who they are and really mean it when it comes to your browser in a way that can't be snooped on by folks on your network. A lot of really interesting things popped out from this.
So this has happened a couple times where researchers are using outdated or abandoned infrastructure. So, what can folks do instead of abandoning their infrastructure outright?
We come at this from a couple of angles. One, if you're a registrar, clearly you should be reading this and like maybe defining some bright lines around a registry, even around what you will allow to be reserved in your namespace. Wholly separate from that is a different discussion about old DNS records and orphan DNS records. And the things that you used to own can come back to haunt you, right? In this case, it allowed them to answer questions on behalf of an entire TLD space. If you're an organization, you might behoove yourself to wonder what could they answer questions as if they stand up, say, one of my old marketing domains or an old email server or the company name for a company we bought 15 years ago but would like to retire, do away with. So it may benefit you to hang on to some of those registrations or to go back in time and see, is there anything that lapsed that we might want to go back and spend $10 to make sure that no one else can. It's a bummer. I hate the idea of telling folks to do defensive registrations because it just benefits not the wrong folks, but it just seems like an unnecessary 10 or $15 a pop for these things. In certain cases, you certainly want to keep these things, or depending on what phishing folks you're up against, it may benefit you to register some things defensively in that arena as well.
Conceptually, the alternative would be if there were, which there is not, but if there were some sort of official like ICANN method for retiring a domain where it's gone forever. But of course, the first thing I think of, and probably you would too, is that would get abused if that existed. So 100% chance of that. So that's probably not the right answer, and it's probably never going to happen anyway. But you're right. It's relatively cheap to do defensive registrations, but it's a bummer that you need to.
I would assume it takes a lot of time, or is that mistaken? Would you say?
In some cases, if they're going back and trying to find the old stuff, that could certainly take time if they haven't had great hygiene about that. It's never a better time to start doing that and get better at it because it gets easier the earlier you can tag stuff and track that. But
Somebody had some resource that really uncovered the connections between domains and the history of them and stuff like that. Wouldn't that be, I would use it.
I would probably use that like
Super
almost every
smart.
day.
Right. That sounds
Yeah.
pretty valid. Well, let's go into like more of the technical stuff here. So, what are the technical steps that Benjamin Harris took to set up his own Whois server, and
Yeah.
what did he uncover?
So it's true. It's not just that you register the domain and then magical things start happening for you, right?
What
You
did he
obviously,
uncover?
yeah, you need to read the spec. And in this case, because he knew that it was a Whois server prior to his kind of picking up of the domain, he then said, okay, I'll just stand one of those up myself, which not easy, not hard in the middle, right? It's a very old spec, but there's open source libraries that can assist you with this type of thing. And I'm sure that they took advantage of it. And then at that point, you're just looking to see what comes in. And so if you compromised an old mail server, you might stand up an MX, right? You might stand up a mail server and then listen to see what comes in. If you stand up an old website, again, you might stand up something web facing that looks like what it used to be, right? In this case, it was Whois. So they stood up an old Whois server and then they looked at all the requests that came in from all around the world. Initially, I think what they had thought was, oh, there was some cutover process here, right? Where if they're going to make this thing registerable, surely they went to the trouble of making sure there was a hard cutoff, that everyone who needs to get data out of this thing knows where the new thing is and is getting data from that. Is not sending requests to the old thing. That's not true. That's not what happened at all. So they got in, let me just see, hundreds of thousands of
such a
requests
missed
from all around the
opportunity.
world.
It could have been practice for the cut over to RDAP.
Yeah. Actually, something to think about here for some of the registrars, right? I think the registries out there that are in this process of transferring from Whois over to RDAP, yeah, you're going to need either a decom plan for the old Whois stuff or some type of long-term support or maintenance plan that says, hey, A, you can't register this particular domain in this namespace. Please go find something else. And then B, like a graceful cutover process. I'm sure that every last one of those organizations is like super duper on top of it, is evidenced by Moby. I mean,
What do you think Moby, the recording artist, has to say about this?
no one's asked him. You
No
got
one
to get
knows.
over.
I think
No.
that's this. I would say that's a broader implication, but what about implications for internet security?
What does Moby have to say about that?
No, just you don't know what he has to say, and that's an implication of these findings is no one's asked him. But for internet security based on these events, what are the broader implications?
I think, again, it comes back to good hygiene around the services that underpin the internet in a lot of ways, right? So Whois sits on top of DNS. It's a lot of people will tell you it was never meant to do anything that it's the new things that it's doing, that it was designed for a much smaller network where you might just want to randomly call that person up at Berkeley and tell them to turn the machine back on. And that's why you need that phone number. Obviously, the commercialization of the internet shifted things dramatically. And now we think of Whois as this very authoritative resource when it is really somewhere in between and is highly dependent on how authoritative the organization that wants to run it wants it to be.
This is preventable. It's just comes back to that good hygiene.
So yes, preventable in that like there were no other TLDs that they were able to pretend to be in quite the same fashion. But I'm sure given enough time, they'll find some other odd way to. RDAP will fix all of this. I'm positive, 100%.
All right, Taylor, Tim, anything else we want to say on this topic before we jump into our hoodie rating for the day?
I'll just say that every time you mention Benjamin Harris, I think of the President Benjamin Harrison, one of the lesser known US presidents, but he was responsible for getting 6 states into the union that were.
Yeah, but how many RCs did he have?
I don't know. That's a good question. Depending on how you think about RCs in the 1890s, there might have been a few.
He was on the telegraph.
Yeah. The precursor to telegram, there were telegrams. They came over the telegraph. Morse code execution.
I saw a great tweet earlier today that was like, bros in the 1700s. What if we started a pamphlet instead of a podcast? Taylor, thank you so much for walking us through this article. Thank you again to Alan Liska for bringing this to our attention. Again, if you're out there listening to our podcast and there's a topic you want to hear about, please let us know. We'd love to talk about it. And if you want to step on the show and talk about it with us, we could do that too. We can make an arrangement. So we're going to go into what we call our hoodie rating. If you are a newer listener to the podcast, first of all, thank you so much. After we talk about our news segments, we like to talk about the severity of what we just discussed. And we like to do that in terms of what we call a hoodie rating. If you think about the stereotypical hacker in a hoodie, we are rating it from 1 to 10 hoodies, 10 being please scream and run around in circles, and 1 is not so bad. You could probably take that
A mere
hoodie off.
curiosity.
What?
A mere curiosity.
Mere curiosity. I was going to say, take the hoodie off, put it in the back of your car, forget about it. That's currently the weather in the Midwest. You start off the day in a hoodie, take it off, it ends up in your car, repeat until you've worn all your hoodies, and then you take them back inside. Anyway, so Taylor, since you explained the article to us and our audience, let's hear from Tim on what he thinks his hoodie rating for this would be.
So I'll echo loving the work that Watchtower did. Of course, they responsibly shut down the experiment when it became obvious what kind of chaos they could sow if they continued it. So really, I think the hoodie rating is about the larger matter of abandoned infrastructure. And there's been just there's like a level of background noise that's ongoing. And occasionally it spikes where usually it'll affect an individual organization rather than a big swath of the internet. But if that organization were the wrong one, it could create pretty big problems. If a bank's DNS gets hijacked, if a government's DNS gets hijacked, things like that. We tend to think of it mostly in DNS rather than Whois, right? So you're now going to direct traffic from destined for that domain to a server that you control instead of the server it's supposed to go to. And all kinds of bad things can happen with that. So the overall matter of abandoned infrastructure at the background noise level, that's how I'll evaluate it, I guess. I would say that's 3 hoodies with the possibility of spiking to 10 hoodies for individual organizations and sometimes for their customers if a particular event crops up. But as a background level of problem for cybersecurity, I'm going to put it at 3 hoodies, like constant.
Taylor, what about you?
It's always interesting when you talk about what a security researcher has done because it's, hey, they're responsibly disclosed it and nobody was really impacted. And as soon as they saw the magnitude of what they had, they immediately stopped down and started contacting the authorities, as it were. So from that perspective, oh, that's not that bad. Things are great. But it was a single registration. It didn't really require any super advanced bug in Whois, or they even researched that stuff. They looked, hey, are there any bugs in Whois that we could use to do something interesting? And they're like, what if we just became our own Whois server and started answering questions for everybody? and found, oh, there's a lot of that. That's the way to do it.
Like the flash mob where everybody showed up at a Best Buy in khakis and blue shirts and started answering Best Buy questions.
Exactly. And they're like, sure, this TV is free today. You just have to carry it right out. It's such a low level of access to it, right? To trick a certificate authority into signing things for you for an entire TLD space feels like to go
Interesting.
6.667.
Excellent.
Yeah. Just because of how like simple it is. And again, it's just the basic hygiene of it. And then thinking, oh, there's a lot of these registries. There's not a lot of centralization across them or standardization in terms of how they do this type of stuff.
It'll be interesting to see if there's any sort of copycat in the short term. There are so many TLDs that could there be another one that's got some kind of a similar exposure? Maybe.
Mhm.
Hopefully, they're all taking a good hard look right now.
This has been great. Thank you, Taylor, so much for walking us through this. And thank you both for your hoodie ratings. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about our next article, which is Arch Nemesis of the Archives. Stay tuned. Hey, Breaking Badness listeners. I'm interrupting our podcast to remind folks that B-Sides Portland is happening this weekend on October 25th and 26th at Portland State University. There will be workshops, interesting talk tracks, and a Capture the Flag contest. The day one keynote will be presented by Marian Marshalik on Why We Research, and the day two keynote will be presented by Keys Cook. Follow B-Sides Portland on LinkedIn, X, and be sure to check out their website, bsidespdx.com, for full agenda details. And now, back to Breaking Badness. And we're back. So we're going to talk about our next article, which is Arch Nemesis of the Archives. So hailed as a bastion of public information, the Internet Archive reports they've suffered a DDoS attack, putting their mission of providing universal access to all knowledge at risk, along with user data. So this seems pretty big. So Tim, maybe just to start, for anybody that doesn't know, what is the Internet Archive and what does it mean if it can't be accessed?
Yeah, first of all, whenever we talk about arch nemesis, I can't help but do this. The Internet Archive, probably everybody listening to this or viewing this is familiar and has used it. It's an absolutely audacious project. The idea that you would archive the entirety of the information superhighway, the World Wide Web, the internet, the series of tubes. It's not like a big truck, the whole shebang. But it's not only that. It's not only all the web pages and stuff, which is 800 and something billion, I think, at this point. It's a digital library of all kinds of media, video, audio, images, text, etc. So if you sit back and start to really think about what an undertaking it is to run the Internet Archive, it just becomes more and more impressive. But what people probably primarily think of, if they weren't super familiar with it, especially by that name, undoubtedly they're familiar with the Wayback Machine, which is the most famous part of the front end of the Internet Archive. And so the whole Internet Archive is used for all kinds of research, et cetera. But Wayback Machine, we commonly find people using that for research, using it for accountability, meaning, yeah, I'm going to look back on the Wayback Machine and find out that your site really was saying that pineapple belonged on pizza, no matter how much you're denying that you think that now. So fact checking and accessing all these different kinds of media. So quick trivia fact about Internet Archive, it was started by the same individual, Brewster Kahle. I'm just going to say it's pronounced Kahle, Kahle. And sorry, Brewster, if I'm getting that wrong. Who also started the Alexa web ranking service that some folks might remember. We at Domain Tools used to use that for site ranking purposes. That was swallowed up by Amazon a while ago and discontinued a couple of years ago. But anyway, that was not many folks knew that he was behind both of those things. And in the aftermath of this event that we're talking about, people have compared this to the famous ancient history burning of the Library of Alexandria, which at the time, comparable. It was the largest compendium of knowledge in the known world. And when it was burned, a lot of precious information was basically lost forever. So it's not a terrible comparison. And if the archive were somehow not to be able to recover from this, that would be a massive loss.
Yeah, I've been trying to make Greek fire for a long time. Still can't do it right.
No, you're gonna have to keep trying.
Wow. I didn't realize. So do you have to be a user to access like the Wayback Machine or like what? It's news to me personally that you needed to create an account or something like that. So can you clarify that for our
I
listeners?
know that was news to me as well. Yeah, it was to access anybody can access the Wayback Machine, but to access some of the other resources required an account. And that was the subject of that 31 million number.
31 million people knew something we didn't know, Tim.
And here's the metaphysical problem here that if you wanted to go back and find out, for example, how all of that worked, the first thing you'd think is you go to the Wayback Machine since the site in question is down. You want to go find out from the Wayback Machine. But wait a minute, there's a problem there. And actually, they will get to this. It's partially maybe limping back toward service right now, but problems remain.
This isn't so much a question, but in the article we're referencing, they mentioned the pop up that comes when you try to get onto that screen, and it's a bit snarky.
Yeah, or it did for a while. You're not seeing that today. But yes, the act itself is despicable. There is in some way, there's some part of me that wonders, was there an aspect of this where the attacker was actually just like mad that the archive was not better defended, that it was hackable like this? But I doubt that's the case. Sometimes it is where, and I struggle to think of a specific example, but sometimes people are just annoyed that it was as easy as it was to take something down. And that's part of why they did it. They're just mad about it. I don't think that's the case here, but I also know that we won't, I think it's going to be a while before we know the real definite attribution, if we ever do, and the full motives that go along with that.
Yeah, I was going to ask. They mentioned in this article there was no financial motive, it seems, to carry out an attack like this. And it is a nonprofit, but is there profit to be had here that maybe we're not aware of?
I doubt it. I think this was a destructive, malicious attack. There are some claims as to who carried it out, that it may have been a pro-Palestinian type of actor with that motivation, just creating a big, chaotic, newsworthy event. There is a group that's claimed responsibility. Again, that's not known for sure. It's like what we've seen sometimes with kinetic attacks. In some cases, there are attacks whose attribution is not obvious right away, and there are various groups that claim responsibility for it for whatever their political motivations are. And that could certainly be the case right here. There will be a lot of forensic work done on this, so I think we'll know more about what the motivations were down the road. My sense is that the statements that have gone out so far are not definitive as far as who this might have been and why they might have done it. And by the way, it was this group, the one that I'm talking about, there's an account on Twitter called SN_Black Meta. They had promised potentially more attacks on Internet Archive. So we shall see.
We shall see. I'll never really understand like any criminal, be it cyber or not, like taking clout for something, or if they didn't do it and still admitting that they did it. It's interesting. I just don't, I guess I don't need that type of attention.
Or because you're a good person, Callie. There are, as long as there has been hacking, there has been a category of hacking that was just for lulz or for the prowess, the bragging rights, and so forth. And in this case, it could be a mixture of that. And again, just trying to get a political message out there saying we did this because we believe in X, Y, or Z, and we are going to make our case known as publicly as possible. So that's why those things generally happen. And again, that may be the motivation here. It may not be. But yeah, you're a good person. So that doesn't resonate with you the way it does with maybe people who are less good than you, Callie.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So
Is it possible that they just wanted the Internet Archive to contain more cat photos? They're like, there's not enough,
yeah, I mean,
But
and we're going to leave them behind.
well, when you do these things, you want to get public opinion on your side. And if they had come out and said that, I think they would have found a certain amount of sympathy.
I agree with that.
But I don't know. Maybe it will turn out that was the case and they're not very good at what they do.
Also, these are all great possibilities. So, Tim, what was the full scope of this attack from what we know so
Yeah.
far?
Oh, okay. So the site was completely down for a while. As you pointed out, it had that snarky message saying, did you know that the Internet Archive was made of sticks? And that's an interesting metaphor that they used there. The sticks, as far as I know, that's the middle Three Little Pigs house, which was still not robust enough, but better than the straw one. So that snarky message was there for a little while. Then the site was just completely like it would not open for a while. Today I went there. So the report was, we're recording this on October 14th, and there was a sort of a promise that it would be back to some functionality by The 14th. So in fact, it does seem to be up today with basically just a text-based front page. I found that even that took a very long time to load. So they are struggling without question. It was a combination of denial of service and defacement. So obviously the defacement of the page to put up that snarky message, the denial of service making it hard to get there to begin with. Of course, the compromise of this account data that is now on Have I Been Pwned. Troy Hunt of Have I Been Pwned confirmed that. But by the way, he said that his analysis showed that 54%, I think it was, of the accounts that were in this 31 million were already on Have I Been Pwned, which, let's face it, most of us have some email address or something that's on Have I Been Pwned. And consider this your, I don't know, maybe we do it approximately quarterly reminder that you should check Have I Been Pwned and sign up for that. Anyway, those things seem to be the extent of the attack. And something that I mentioned earlier, what does not appear to be part of this attack, and we hope it isn't, is actual destruction of the data in the archive. That would be really catastrophic. DDoSes are tricky because if you notice in the way that we talk about DDoS defense, it's never, or at least rarely, it shouldn't ever be DDoS prevention. You pretty much can't prevent DDoS. What you can do is mitigate it. And there are various outfits. Radware has gone on record talking about some of the aspects of this DDoS. They're an example of one of the companies that is in the DDoS mitigation space. But when you have an actor that can marshal the resources to carry out a really big distributed denial of service, that is hard to mitigate. The good news is eventually the mitigation usually is successful. Sometimes they back off of the attack. So there's no DDoS that goes on forever, but they are costly and it does take time often to mitigate them and then ultimately recover.
Understood. So if we actually did lose all of that data that the Internet Archive has, I guess not to underscore it at all, it would be catastrophic. There's probably no backup for that information, right?
There has to be, I'm sure there is backup for some of it, but it is a vast amount of information. I don't have a stat at my fingertips of how many petabytes of data the Internet Archive represents, but it's a huge amount. And so I don't know much about, I don't know anything, frankly, about what their backup capabilities were and whether said backups could have been affected as well. But as I say, there is no evidence right now that the data has been destroyed. So let's not manifest that into being.
So how have defenders responded to this attack?
It's actually, I somewhat covered that in the sense that, so there is some DDoS mitigation underway. You can get to that page if you're patient. There is this temporary page that's up. Brewster Kahle has made a statement to the effect that they're working on full restoration and there will be restoration. So the big things that I was aware of that were the existential threat to the Internet Archive had more to do with kind of the political side and funding and so forth, and not as much about actual cyber attacks. I think we'll probably, because there's so much attention on this, because it's such an important part of the internet, we'll probably learn more, forensically speaking, about what kinds of vulnerabilities may have been exploited, et cetera, because it wasn't just the DDoS, because the actual archive was compromised. So if it were just a DDoS, for folks who are less familiar, so a DDoS does not, in and of itself, does not involve hacking, so to speak, a site. You can do a DDoS without ever touching the code of the site that you're trying to deny service to. In this case, it was both aspects, right? There was the DDoS and there was some compromise, an incursion into archive.org itself.
Thanks, Tim, for walking us through this. I really appreciate it. We'll go into our hoodie rating now. So, since you walked us through the article, we'll hear from Taylor first on his thoughts about a hoodie rating.
It's tough to do a real hoodie without at least like full understanding of like how far they got in there and how they got in there. But we can attempt. We can make an attempt.
Yeah.
This doesn't seem to be, it's not a widespread thing. It's highly targeted at the Internet Archive. Internet Archives, you're right, Tim. We at Domain Tools think that we are data hoarders. They have taken it to a whole other level to the point where I think Google is now redirecting their cache stuff over to Internet Archive. Google used to cache sites, determined it was too expensive or maybe didn't mesh well with getting advertising revenue. I don't know. To the point where core places that were doing things like this are now relying solely on them in a way that they weren't maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So Like that kind of raises the stakes for the archive folks a little bit in that they've got a spotlight on them. So just from a mess perspective, we'll go like 3.23 hoodies. It's not something that anyone is going to have to like spend time on the weekends working to clean up from the customer base or whatnot. But like for the folks at the Internet Archive, it's probably a 4 alarm fire. Maybe depending on what they've got internally. Hey, maybe it was just an admin DB or like custom, just an admin or if it's just like the front end serving stuff that got hit versus not all of the data on the back end, or was this a very persistent actor that sat there for a long time and got themselves into some backups somewhere along the line? That would be interesting to find out, but that's where I'll put it now.
Okay, that's fair. Tim, do you feel similarly?
Yeah, I'm in the same neighborhood as that. I think I'm just looking at what the domain tools Iris investigated, what it said for the server type, which is Nginx. And interestingly, the new value as of stuff is being restored is actually an older version of Nginx than what was previously shown there. But so the question might be, was there an exploit there? Was there a vulnerability? Nginx, of course, is very popular. So it's possible that could have been the route in, but as Taylor and I have both been saying it, we won't really know until more is forensically understood about this. Now, so I'll go a little bit higher. I'm going to go to 4. And the reason for that is that the damage to archive.org, of course, doesn't just affect archive.org. There are probably a lot of organizations that have a fairly heavy dependence and not just a curiosity in using the Wayback Machine or using some of the other resources that the archive holds or held. So I'll put me down for 4, and it's a provisional. This is so often the case when we do these stories, right? Because we try to do Breaking Badness and not old badness. And so we don't always know the full extent of what something was or
Yeah.
the whole story behind how a compromise took place. And so for now, I'm at 4 hoodies. If it turns out there's a massive vulnerability in Nginx that hadn't been understood before, then that would become a higher number, but we don't know.
That's a good point, Tim. And if you are an organization and you're leveraging the Internet Archive and you're donating to them,
Yeah, yeah, you need to change that.
you're part of the problem. All right.
Yeah.
Looking to you, Google. What are you doing?
All right. Thank you, Tim and Taylor, for that. That was excellent information to have. Before we adjourn for today from our podcast, we're going to go into our final segment of the day, which is gold guidance and grievances. Oh, Taylor's excited. Again, if you're a newer listener, we like to end our episodes talking about our gold guidance and grievances, which are pretty much what they sound like. We're going to share a good piece of news. We're going to share some tips that we might have, and then anything that's bothering us. And they could all be InfoSec related or not, doesn't have to be. And we say gold guidance and grievances, but in reverse order, because we just ending on the bad note is it's very difficult to come back from. So we're not going to do that. We'll start there and work our way to the good thing. And then we can all leave feeling better than before, hopefully.
So great.
So we just heard from Tim on his article. So Taylor, we'll start with your gold guidance and grievances.
Yes. I've got a few things. They're both gold and guidance and maybe a little grievances. I don't know.
Oh,
Uh, we'll mix it all in.
okay.
One is the .io TLD space. We've been spending some time talking about TLDs today, and .mobi and .io is a CCTLD or country code TLD that is currently managed, I want to say, by the British government because they have some long held rights over these islands in the Indian Ocean. IO is not input output. A lot of folks think that .io is like some fancy tech TLD that emerged amongst the GTLDs when we really commercialized that space. But no, .io has been around for a very long time. There is a soon-to-be changeover in the administration of the islands, where the British government's going to be turning them back over to the folks that are there to manage it. And there is an outside chance, although unlikely, that all of the IOTLDs will be deprecated or the namespace itself may evaporate. I've seen some articles about saying, hey, this is going to be happening. This could be a potential thing that eventually happens. But there is a I'd say, that's your kind of grievance. The gold and the guidance would be that there's a super long tail for TLD spaces. If we look at something like .su from Soviet Union, which is still very much kicking and has a 50-year spin down from ICANN, what is very likely to happen is that the IO namespace will probably change hands, get to the folks who should actually be managing it, maybe should have been the whole time, and they will realize that, oh, there's a good revenue stream here, and this is a good a great place to maybe begin advertising for the Indian Ocean, the
Well,
islands in
well,
the Indian Ocean. Uh,
who is the administrative body of the Indian Ocean?
it's a couple of islands right now, and so they are like British territories currently that'll be changing over, and yeah, there
I
will
mean,
be
this could probably be a pretty big financial boon for those islands, right?
true,
I
and
think there's
also
really a lot of money in .io.
the first that we should look to see those rates go up, I bet. They
Yeah.
will go up. Second, when you deal with country code TLD space, you don't get a whoever governs that space gets to choose what happens in the namespace. So there are a lot of folks that were using .ly out of Libya for cute ly names, Bitly, that type of thing. The government there may decide that there's stuff that they either A, they don't want anybody to register stuff in the namespace, and they just want to run their official government business on that space, or they may to decide to put kind of restrictions on the content that those sites can operate with and work with, which could happen. But in this case, a lot of folks are running around saying like .io is going to completely go away. That seems highly unlikely. Then the other kind of gold is we had a cyber insurer, a very large one, come out and say that the ransomware attacks, like the number of claims they paid out on went down Q1 2024 versus Q1 2023. So that's good news. Slightly bad news is the overall payout went up a little bit. So
I saw the headline, but I didn't read the article. So the reason they paid out less wasn't because they just denied more claims, but it was because they actually were seeing less ransomware. Is that true?
that was the thinking, but the ransomware was of a higher leverage so that the overall claims were
Right.
so good
So
news, bad news.
thanks, Tay. Tim, what about your gold guidance and grievances?
So I'm going to stray a little bit from cybersecurity because really the rule is you can talk about anything. Okay. So my grievance is that I still, after decades, I've still never seen the aurora borealis. And there have been several occasions when, and one of them, there was a geomagnetic storm a couple days ago, as of the time we're recording this. And a lot of people in my state saw it. I looked multiple times, no joy. There was a really big one back in, I want to say May or
Hey,
so.
it was, I remember that one.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
I went out on Lake Washington one of those nights, getting away from as much light pollution as you can when you're in the middle of a city, and looked, nothing, absolutely skunked. So I'm skunked once again. So that
I
kind of,
haven't seen it either.
yeah.
Oh,
I
someday.
needed to start at 6:30 because
And yes, by the way, to everybody who's thinking about this, yes, I tried the phone trick, holding up my phone to see if it showed up there. No, nothing. And my guidance as we are in the, thank goodness, we're toward the end of the election season in the States, although who knows what's going to happen next. So fight disinformation, figure out something that you can do today to fight disinformation. One example of something I did was I volunteer with the Seattle Office of Emergency Management, and I made an introduction between those folks and Kate Starbird at the University of Washington, who does fantastic, stellar work on disinformation. Any big event that occurs, be it a natural disaster, be it civil unrest, whatever, there's going to be a ton of this going on. So figure out, this is one of those kind of think globally, act locally deals where I think it's important for everybody to have really good awareness of how this is working and what they might be able to do to fight it, whether it's just enlightening people in your own family or your friend circle, or whether you have a job or some kind of a role where you can do something larger, but so important. My goal is also related to the guidance in that the volunteering I do with the Office of Emergency Management has to do with ham radio communication. And ham radio was in the news a lot in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and to a lesser extent, Hurricane Milton, in helping folks in cut-off communities in Western North Carolina find out the health and welfare status of loved ones and getting supplies moved around and so forth in a total absence of commercial cell service and regular communications, telephones, et cetera, landline phones, cell phones. It was all out. And there were some ham operators that were doing really fantastic work helping folks recover from that, and we'll be continuing to do that. So yay, ham radio. That's my goal.
ham radio, by the way, tastiest radio.
Absolutely.
People don't know that.
Yep. Goes well with cheese radio, little mustard radio on there.
yeah, for sure. All right. This has been great. Thank you, Taylor and Tim, for joining us on Breaking Badness, talking about those articles, giving us your gold guidance and grievances. It's always great to chat with you. It's been so long. It's great that we're back in the saddle, though, and on video, which is very cool. And thank you to our listeners. We appreciate you coming back every week. And we hope you'll come back again next week for another all new episode of Breaking Badness. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.